Greetings, programs. Welcome to episode 31. Why corporations are psychopaths and will kill us all. So today is going to be slightly more economic and slightly more psychological. Sorry if it sounds a bit odd, it's raining here and there's a lot of fans going, and I probably had to filter it all out, so it might sound a bit weird. Also, by popular demand, a different backdrop. Now that I have my box working again, I have all the files I had stashed on it. Turns out I didn't lose them, yay me. Today, we will be talking about corporations. So, as per usual, first things first, what is a corporation and why is that a problem? Well, corporations can come in many guises, but today we'll be talking about your classic corporation that everybody thinks of when they hear the word, with board of directors and shareholders. A corporation, in this vein, differs from businesses such as you might own, in that it will have shareholders usually. Each shareholder has paid an amount of money for shares. These shares get regular payouts from the profits of the corporation. More shares, bigger payout. And this is where the board comes in. There will be a group of people who are collectively in charge of the corporation. The head person is the CEO, or Chief Executive Officer, the one responsible for executing the plans, hence the name. Okay, so what? How does that make them psychopaths? Well, in a couple of ways. First off, people who are psychopathic or sociopathic are drawn to businesses. They are good at it, and their ruthlessness is an asset there. Okay, what's a psychopath or a sociopath then? Why two words? Well, the term is old and kind of out of date now. Nowadays, it's antisocial personality disorder. How the term was used is a little mushy, but generally a psychopath was somebody who was naturally lacking in empathy. Possibly due to issues with mirror neurons, but basically it was a hardware fault. A sociopath was somebody who was induced to lack empathy by their life up until this point. Damage, or a software fault if you prefer. But the term was essentially just used to end up describing really bad guys and slightly less bad guys. I suspect nowadays it's been renamed, because if you're not going around murdering people, who cares whether you actually feel for your fellow humans or not? Okay, so that's psychopathy. Well, what the heck has this got to do with corporations? Well, a bunch of different things. Like I said, there is an increased chance that a successful business person will be one. If you don't feel for the people that you hurt on your way to the top, you're more likely to get to the top. See footnote number 1 for professions prone to attracting psychopaths. Okay, so is that it then? They're all psychos? Well, no. No, the problem is far worse than that. If they were, it would be fixable by simply swapping out the psychopaths for people who are not psychopaths. No. The second stage of the problem is that, like the death camp guards discussed in episode 24, you don't have to be a psychopath to do terrible things. No, we have a problem in multiple parts. First, the minor problem of actual psychopaths, despite their rareness, making it to the top. It's not great, but there aren't that many of them. Secondly, we have the problem that ordinary people can become ruthless if they're ideologically motivated or motivated by money to do so. That's not great either, and that's more of a problem. But lastly, and this is the biggie, there is a systemic problem with boards and CEOs. And here it is. Boards are motivated only by one thing: profit. Now, our person has morals, ethics, empathy perhaps. They can be shamed or convinced to act ethically. A board cannot, because a board is not a person, it's not a human being. It's composed of people, but like, say, an army, while it is made of people as an entity, it is not a person, and thus does not act like a person. And so while a person who is psychologically normal might want profit and success, and most of us do, they have restraints. Morals and ethics that will restrain them. Social and legal controls to convince or coerce them not to do the bad things. But the problem is, a corporation is not a person. A person has to look their victims in the eye. A person cannot simply swap out troublesome parts of their minds. And a corporate board can. This brings us to how these things are possible. Emotional distance. The old saying is, it's hard to kill somebody when you have to look them in the eye. And this translates over into less dramatic situations as well. If you were the village baker or blacksmith, you had to temper your profiteering, as you live in the village where the people that you make the profit from also live. Too much price gouging, and out come the pitchforks. They know where you live, and they know where the blacksmith lives as well. But when the smithy or the bakery is owned by someone else, whether it be a lord in the capital, or a rich merchant up on the hill, or somebody living in the next town, then that check, that balance, is gone. The owner can just hand out orders for things like pricing, and though the baker themselves may voice some objections, those objections lack the weight that pitchforks carry. I think you will have experienced this yourself on some level. If you've ever had an issue with a product from a place that manufactures that product, or is a simple old school store where the owner works there, you can usually get your issue sorted pretty quickly. You show them the problem, and they are impelled to fix it in order to maintain a good relationship and a good reputation in the community. Everybody is happy. If, on the other hand, you have had to deal with a larger organization, you will likely have found that the person you're dealing with is playing piggy in the middle. They have been handed orders or policy to follow, and they have no power to change that policy. So you tell them all about your problem, and they tell you that it's not company policy to fix your specific issue, and that they have no authority to change it. You can't pitchfork them. They are just the poor sod passing you the message. And the person who laid down these rules is some other person in head office, in a whole other town, or even a whole other country entirely. They don't get to see the people they annoy or dispossess, and so they are insulated from the results of their actions on an emotional level. Now, the issue with the board is similar. The board's job is to increase profit. That's what they are there for. The shareholders don't usually care about how the company does what it does. They just want to see their balance sheets go up. They are one step further removed emotionally. And with that in mind, they will select for the board whoever it is that gets them the most profit. And if the current board is not giving them the profits they're expecting, the board will be pressured to get somebody who will get them the profits they're expecting. And here's where the emotional distance becomes important. The shareholders just want to see their investment pay off. And the board knows it. So the CEO who is steering this ship is under constant pressure to do one thing: make profit. And so, if that CEO is given a range of options, and some of those options have higher profits, then they are going to be pressured by the board to take that option, because the board has to explain it to the shareholders. And often, those options come with costs. Sure, if the plant or business stayed in
insert your favourite first world country here,
they will continue to produce high quality goods and keep the workers in jobs. But if they go overseas or replace them all with robots, they will cut costs and get to keep more of the profit. And the CEO has to explain to the board why they did not seek the path of more profit. And while the CEO may not relish the thought of all those workers losing their jobs, that's not their concern. And if they do have an attack of conscience about it, they can always be replaced by somebody who does not have such pains. And keep in mind, most CEOs are temporary anyway. They only have to finish out their run and show a profit at the end, and they've won. That's it. And don't forget, the shareholders will be pressuring the board constantly to make it happen. And in many cases, they are neither privy to those details, the shareholders, nor do they care to learn them. After all, they can maintain innocence if they don't know the details. So it's in their interest not to know these details. And thus, like water slowly cutting a channel through rock, millimetre by millimetre, year by year, the board of directors will slowly be replaced by more and more ruthless people, and will find the most ruthless, profit-focused member of their group to find the most profit and lead them. And much of that profit, unfortunately, comes from externalizing costs. Why manufacture in wealthy Europe with its high worker wages, strong environmental regulations, and strong unions, when you can manufacture or process in the third world and not have to spend money on making that waste product safe, obeying costly safety regulations, or paying the locals a high wage? And that's the problem. Evolution. In the case of survival of the fittest, it is the fittest for the environment that will survive. And in our current corporate environment, the environment selects for the ones that will generate profit at any cost. Even when a giant corporation is fined billions for its bad behavior, it often still is the rational option to take for the CEO in terms of profit. because they will still make more profit that way, even with the fine, than they would have otherwise. And there's always a chance that they will not actually end up receiving a fine, and that's before we even get into politics. So that is why corporations are psychopaths. There are multiple layers between the people driving the system and the end results of that system. And that lack of feedback produces the same sort of lack of concern or empathy with the consequences of those actions. Okay, cool. Well, what about the kill us all part? Well, that part is simple. While theoretically it's possible that an upwards trend may possibly continue going up, a downward trend must have an endpoint somewhere. If the corporations pursue profit at any costs, then they will eventually either destroy the environment doing it, or society, or both. And keep in mind, the CEOs doing the planning are incentivized to act in short-sighted ways, and we already see the writing on the wall. If you tell somebody about the military-industrial complex, or you mention the phrase, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, none of these comments are new. They're not unknown, they're not a surprise, they're not shocking to anyone. What's that? Imaginary interviewer? Governments can restrain these vicious corporations and force them to clean up their act? To not destroy the environment? Or to destroy society? Yes, they can. That sort of thing is like an immune response, fighting back against a disease. So what is going to be the next rational response from the corporation? Well, what is the most terrifying and unstoppable disease in our modern times? That's right, one that attacks the immune system, HIV. Back in the day, the government was the big dog. Even the wealthiest corporation had to be careful with the government. Government had an entire country backing it. But now, in the modern age, with advanced technology and sophisticated banking systems, we have corporations with wealth equal to or greater than that of entire countries, and not small countries either. Now, in many cases, the shoe is on the other foot. Entire countries have to be careful of corporations. Governments must give tax breaks to corporations, lest those corporations leave for places where the taxes are more profitable. Consider that this happened recently with Amazon in the US, with various states bidding and vying with each other for that second head office. States that have the size, power, and income of many other countries all by themselves. Gosh, that sounds terrible. Okay, so what is to be done about all this? Well, I don't know. I'm a small YouTuber, not an economics guru. I would recommend reading Richard Wolff and Robert Reich, or going to their YouTube channels. They have a lot to say on this, and they're economists. I am not. Unfortunately, I can't really recommend any right-wing economists, as they seem to be almost universally invested in maintaining the current status quo, even as it visibly fails. But I will spell out a few things. Corporations are like a life form in a way. They respond to the stimuli and selection pressures that they are given. As they are now, the successful ones evolve in the direction of maximum profit, to the detriment of the people and the environment, which means they either need to be replaced or have their selection pressures changed. The problem is, if, for example, the total cost of any externalities was factored in, pollution, for example, then those polluting activities would no longer be profitable, and that would be good. But the risk is always that it would be more profitable to simply get the law changed and to continue the polluting activity, either by influencing politicians in democratic states, or by outright bribing dictators in totalitarian ones. Whatever rules are implied to encourage corporations to move in a direction that we like, the cost of overcoming those rules has to be higher than the cost of simply going along with them. Otherwise, those rules will be overcome by simply using the power and wealth of the corporation to change things in favor of the corporation. Or we need to tear down the whole idea of corporations and replace them with something else. But if we do replace them, they have to be replaced with something that works, something that isn't pie in the sky and is resilient. The existing corporate entity is resilient because it has evolved along with us. It makes use of basic human drives and needs. It happens naturally as businesses grow and combine to become more powerful. So whatever does come next also has to work with and channel those needs, drives, and desires. Otherwise, we'll be right back here where we are in a few years. So, in short, Do not expect corporations to act like people, or for the kinds of controls that do work on people to work on a corporation. If their CEO gets caught doing something nasty, they can simply fire them. Look contrite, pay a fine, hire a new CEO, and go right back to work. We've seen it on the news more than once. Something to think about. That's all for today. Nice long episode to keep you amused. I'll put links to those economists I mentioned in the doobly-doo down below, so have a look there. Tune in next time for prisons. What are they for, and why? Bye for now.